Another Bearded Wonder Explains. This time we're talking about 3D politics in a 1D world. And so I want to make the argument today that there are actually three dimensions to our political landscape in America, and that oftentimes we only pay attention to one of those dimensions. So, the kind of terminology that we're all very familiar with is the left and the right. So you'll hear the terms the left, Democrats, or liberal kind of as one side of the political spectrum, and you'll see the right, conservative, or Republican as the other side of that system. And that's pretty much the only way that we describe politics. I want to suggest to you that left and right, which is one kind of dimension of a three-dimensional system, is really an economic axis. Kind of thinking in terms of math. And so on the left side, we have socialism. It's this idea that the government needs to be empowered to redistribute resources, and we'll talk about that more in a second. And on the right, the far right, we have laissez-faire capitalism, this idea that the government keeps its hands out of everything, or unregulated business. So to kind of illustrate this point, you would have like unions that have the government protects their jobs while they're striking. You would have a high minimum wage that would force businesses to pay certain prices. Taxes, other things like that would be on the socialist side of things. And the free market and the laissez-faire capitalism would be that there is no minimum wage, and if you strike, you lose your job, those kind of things. And so the question is, basically, what do we do with people's resources? And according to a socialist, to redistribute the income, you tax the heck out of wealthy people. So you suck up their money through taxes, and then you give it to people who don't have as much money. And you don't give it to them directly, although that does happen sometimes. That's what's happening during coronavirus. But you give people tax credits for having children. You give food stamps, Medicaid, single-payer health care systems, direct payments. Somebody has to pay for all of that stuff. And when we say that the government's paying for it, that really means that the government has to get that money somewhere, and the government gets its money from taxes. And according to a socialist, we take those taxes from the wealthy, or you'll hear them oftentimes refer to the upper 1%. What that really means is we're going to take a whole bunch of Bill Gates' money and give it to a whole bunch of poor people, but rather than writing a check or depositing it into their bank accounts, we're going to give them these other programs to help them instead. In a laissez-faire system, we would just be getting rid of the government completely, which means that in a you keep what you earn system, you have these wealthy people, and the money makes its way to the poor people through jobs. Basically, the poor people work for the wealthy people, and they kind of compete and do all of those things, and we'll talk a lot more about this when we get to economics, but basically that's how they get money. And so these are the two kind of competing ideas on the political spectrum. Now, the first thing that we should recognize is that this entire spectrum is shifted. The Democrats aren't full-bore socialists, and the Republicans are definitely nowhere close to full-bore laissez-faire capitalists. In other words, the Republicans support taxes, and they're not talking about getting rid of a lot of Social Security and other things like that. And so they are fairly close to the middle on the economic axis. And the Democrats lean a little bit more to the left on this axis. However, this is not the only axis that we should be talking about. It is, by the way, the only one that I think we actually do talk about, and that's because there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans in the other ways. So, The second axis, if we want to think about it in terms of up and down, would be what we would call an authority axis. And so this would be basically splitting out between authoritarian, where the government decides how things go, or libertarian, where the individual decides. And so one example of this would be that both the Democrat and the Republican Party say that they have a specific definition for marriage, that the government itself should be making that definition. Now, they have different definitions, but the point is that even though they are different definitions, they both think that the government should be the one deciding it, which is an authoritarian shift. An individual shift would be if they decided that everybody picks what marriage means to them. And both political parties kind of advocate for this idea that that's a crazy idea, where the individuals would pick what that means. In American politics, because we're a federalist system, there's also a federalism axis. This would be like your z-axis. So if we have up and down and left and right, we would also have in and out, which is difficult to show on a computer screen, so we're going to kind of split it out here. If you remember 3D graphing from algebra, that's basically what we're looking at here. So you would have a national government shift and a state or a local government shift. And basically this issue is almost gone from our politics because we fought a war about it about 150 years ago, and that decision was made for us on a battlefield. And so the national government kind of shift, everything in American government is going to be shifted probably towards the national government. So where are the people? It's opinion time, which means that I can only tell you what my opinion is as far as this is concerned. But before I do that, I should probably, full disclosure, just kind of tell you where I am. So on the left-right shift, I tend to be pretty laissez-faire, hands-off. I don't want the government making a whole lot of laws, although I recognize that some regulation is necessary because we'd have out-of-control pollution and other things like that if it was totally just up to the free market. I also tend to be extremely libertarian. I tend to think that the government should not make decisions for individual people. I recognize that that's going to lead to a lot of conflict between people, but I'd much rather have conflict between people rather than conflict between a person and a government, because that's how people get shut up really quickly. And then on the state axis, I'd be somewhere in the middle, probably a little bit leaning towards the states in certain ways. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is basically to kind of share with you that I have a bias. I have a particular kind of view of the government. It influences the way that I present all of the material that you've been engaging with in this course. I am not saying that I'm right. I obviously probably believe that I'm right. If I didn't believe I was right, I would change my views. But you should feel free to disagree with me. This is what I believe makes our country great, is that we can disagree with people in all of these different kind of aspects and hopefully still work together. But I do think it's important for you to know my bias, just because even when I'm trying to be unbiased, I'm trying to be my version of unbiased, which may not be the same thing as your version of unbiased. And so if everybody has a different version of unbiased, then you should probably at least know what that bias is in order to evaluate what those people think. So that's me. I tend to think that the Democrats, I've kind of showed you where I think they lay, and the Republicans where they lie. And you'll notice here that I think that both the Democrat and Republican parties are shifted in one direction on the individual, on the authoritarian axis and on the national state axis. I think that both of them equally agree that the national government and the Supreme Court should make decisions rather than state governments, and I think that both of them tend to agree that the national government should be making certain definitions and other things like that rather than individuals. Thomas Jefferson would probably lie here on these spectrums, and that would be where I would put Alexander Hamilton, um, basically, for those things. I think that the people of the United States, if you were to kind of like try to find an average person, of course, no such thing exists, but if you could somehow average the beliefs of the people of the country, I think that they would be between the Democrat and the Republican Party as it pertains to the left-right axis or the economic axis. I think if you looked at the individual liberties axis, most people want to have more freedom than most people that I tend to talk to, and maybe it's just because of the people that I talk to. You see where I am. We tend to talk to people who are like us. And so maybe my view is distorted here, but I think that most people tend to want to live and let live. Listen, I don't care what you do in your home, and you don't care what I do in my home. We're just going to leave each other alone. I think that most people tend to agree with those ideas. And I also think that most people, and definitely in the conversations I've read in these government courses from you all, I think that a lot of you would prefer to have more left up to the states than what is currently being left up to the states. Now, those are my opinions, and you're welcome to disagree with them. But the question is, where are you in this three-dimensional kind of dynamic? And the other kind of question that I want to point out is this. On two of these three axes, there is no difference, at least in my opinion, between the Democrats and the Republican Party, which means that there's a lot of room for other ideas that we're not currently getting into our political system. Now, only you can decide for you whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. All I can do is try to give you something to think about, where maybe the choices that we're being given between Democrats and Republicans are not as different as we're being led to believe. That's all I have for you today. Hope you have a good day.